Good afternoon, everybody. I can't believe it's afternoon already. It's been a long day. So I'm really excited that so many of you are still here with us at this late of the afternoon. Um, I have had some amazing conversations. I've had some amazing opportunities to engage some really amazingly interesting, powerful people, both local, regional, and national. I hope that you have too. And we are entering our closing plenary for our 2013 Symposium on Race and Place. And in our construction of this symposium, it was extremely important to me that there would be one panel that specifically look at local issues that are campus, county, city, state, region specific. One, because I think all politics is local. Two, because the educational philosophy of this institution states that the borders of our campus are the borders of the state, are the borders of the nation, thus the borders of the world, correct? And so if it is our mission to take our access and our class cachet that we have received by having the opportunity to be the beneficiaries of this sort of class reality of being at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, then do we not have a responsibility to use that access and those resources in a way in which we touch and transform our city and our state and our region and our nation? And so I made a decision very succinctly that the closing plenary will always look at something very local. Sometimes that'll be campus specific, sometimes it'll be sort of city and county. And when thinking about race and place, I couldn't think of anything more significant to have a conversation about than imprisonment. I was completely astonished and distraught when a colleague of mine shared with me the numbers around people of color and incarceration in Dane County, and that Dane County leads the nation in per capita incarceration of people of color. And I thought, how is that possible? Like, I came from Cook County, like Chicago. Like, how could Dane County be the leader? And so if you've looked at the map, you see how many people of color are here compared to white people. How is it possible that Dane County is leading the nation in per capita incarcerations of people of color? And so I thought it was really important to have a conversation about incarceration. And so I started saying, who could I engage and bring along to have these conversations? And it started with me reaching out to a former mentor and colleague of mine, Dr. Townsand Price-Spratlen at The Ohio State University, and just like, hey, I know you do this kind of work and you look at these things and what's going on? And I was asking some other general question. It was like, yeah, and I just kind of finished doing this book on imprisonment and the community, and I was like, oh, well, why don't you come? Right? Like, this is exactly what we need. And so I was really excited to hear about his project, and I'm really excited for him to share that project with us. But then I thought, and what would that mean to use lessons learned, information gathered from this ethnographic study about Philadelphia, but then to think about, well, how does that apply and how does that show up for us in Dane County? And how can those of us who care about the plight of people of color in Dane County, what can we do? And what do we need to know? And so I wanted to gather a group of people who I felt were really interested and committed to those questions and to that work. And so with us on the panel, we have Barbara McKinney, who's the Executive Director of Madison Urban Ministry. Associate Director. I haven't promoted you. I haven't promoted you.
I want to go back to work on Monday.
I don't know why I promoted you. I just think that much of you. I think that's what it is. And Madison Urban Ministry does a lot of work with reentry and with the formerly incarcerated. And I heard about their work through Everett Mitchell, who shared with us this morning on the opening plenary. And I asked him to suggest someone. And he was like, you need Barbara McKinney. So I called Barbara McKinney. And then someone else told me, well, if you really want to have this conversation, you need to talk to Pam Oliver. And I was like, who is Pam Oliver? They was like, Pam is on campus. She's in the Department of Sociology. This is her work. She does racial disparities and incarceration in Wisconsin. I said, oh, let me get a hold of Pam Oliver. And I contacted Pam Oliver, and she was gracious enough to say this, yes, I'm going to find time. The world is crazy. There's a lot going on, but I'm going to figure out some way to be involved in this. And so we invited her to come along and participate. And then this is another friend, colleague, Mario, who I'd sort of met in very social ways, but I knew had been deeply involved with Centro Hispano and was a full-time staff member there. And I had heard about the Come Vida project and some of the work that they were doing, and I thought, well, that's an important voice of a person who's working outside of the university in the community and also addressing these issues, and outside of an African-American, specifically African-American context too, and that's really, particularly when you look around the numbers for Latinos and African-Americans in Dane County. And so I wanted to sort of bring together an interesting mix of people who are committed to these issues and questions from various spaces. And so that's what we have today. So we're gonna open up with Dr. Townsand Price-Spratlen from The Ohio State University, who some of you have had the honor of sort of being introduced to already this morning in the plenary, who sort of tickled our minds. And then we're gonna follow it up with just some conversations, some questions about what does this mean for us here in Dane County, and what do the numbers and the statistics that we're facing mean, and how are we to be in the face of those realities? And so with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Townsand.
Thanks, y'all, for coming and sticking around. Thanks very much to the Institute for Justice, Education, and Transformation and the Multicultural Student Center here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And thanks very much, Dante Hilliard. I know him as Nebby, for the invitation. Really appreciate it. I'd like to talk a bit about the problem and then just explore how we're living in the solution and how we all can nurture that solution further. That'll make a bit more sense as I move further, but let me address the problem first. This is the prison industrial complex. It's an image that is put together by the Corrections Documentary Project, and
Can I say something?
Sure.
It's Ashley Hunt. He's a former student of mine.
Okay.
Just so you know.
That's cool stuff. Well, thanks to Ashley Hunt. This is a representation of some of the complexities and nuances that inform what has come to be known as the prison industrial complex, a phrase that gained some credence out of the late 80s and then into the 90s, gained popularity when Professor Angela Davis used it in a couple speeches in the early 90s. But we can come back to this if we'd like, but I'd like to explore particular statistical elements that feed this system of relationships understood as the prison industrial complex. Let me first begin at the end. 5 points for us to briefly consider. We're all in it. We're all in the prison industrial complex. 2, there's variation because some folks are more impacted by their position within that system than others. 3, our current prison industrial complex is a dinosaur. The current U.S. practices are fiscally alone, much less morally and ethically, but fiscally unsustainable. 4, from a standpoint of change, principled transformations are happening here and elsewhere. And it is some examples of those principled transformations that we'll have a chance to explore. And 5, what are the specific strategies of action that we collectively can further to enrich a cultural shift, so that even the political narratives where political capital that is still gained from lock 'em up and a phrase like being tough on crime, still gains, it's going to require a meaningful cultural and societal shift. So we'll have a chance to explore those relationships in the further dialogue. So 5 points to begin. And presentation outline, I want to go in a real-time efficient fashion so we can get into collective dialogue. Why study race and race and place real briefly, why study it in the context of the U.S. prison system, what are current challenges within that race-place-prison relationship, and then how is Reconstructing Rage intended to make a contribution to that larger dialogue, transforming it. And then we'll explore the local, where to from here. So, race and place. This is Franklin County, where it is the city of Columbus, where the Ohio State University is located. As you can see, the couple comments on color contrast. Why study race and place? The darker the brown color, the greater the opportunities are. Opportunities in terms of higher employment, higher projected job growth, higher K through 12 math scores, lesser incarceration rates for returning citizens, higher opportunity. The lighter the color, the lesser the opportunity. Okay? And the green dots, each green dot represents 200 African Americans. And what I hope you see is that there's a predominance of green dots in areas of low opportunity, and a sprinkling of green dots in areas of highest opportunity. Race and place matter in informing the location of our lives and the nature of the opportunities and environments of support for life's possibilities that inform them. And this is just an image that I hope clearly reflects elements of that. And yes, even in the car culture dynamics, people can be transported, but where you live matters. And so local area residence is consequential. So why study race and place? Because opportunity is spatially variable, and that variation is highly unequal. So why study within the context of the U.S. prison system? Because the prison system is perhaps most directly a direct extension of the, quote, peculiar institution. The peculiar institution is a phrase that was given to chattel slavery that operated prior to the founding of this country through, as we know, the end of the Civil War. Well, officially at the end of the Emancipation Proclamation, but at the end of the Civil War. So the prison system is actually a direct extension of that peculiar institution on a variety of levels. We could get into the history if you want. Local Quant and others have explored that relationship. The Reconstruction era after slavery's end was a critical period of hope and possibility that was very quickly cut off with Rutherford B. Hayes' presidency and the compromise that then moved overwhelmingly African ancestry persons from slavery and property to caste, to a second-class citizenship understood as Jim Crow. And the legacy of all that into today is that severe race disparities exist at every stage of our current life that inform what some call, many are calling, the school to prison pipeline, where individuals, for example, this whole question around the Newtown shooting, that is, some are suggesting police forces on school campus, the imprisonment of our K through 12 education is actually magnifying disparities that trickle up into the adult system and into the prison system. They feed the carceral state. So why study the prison system? Because race and place matter, and the prison system has a legacy of some real challenging dynamics. Let's place race, place, and prisons in a global context first. The U.S. is the carceral leader on a global scale. The only country, you can see from this bar chart put together by the Center for Prison Studies, the only countries that come close are Russia and Rwanda. So if you are the company you keep, what does that speak to for us being by far the global leader relative to Russia and Rwanda? So the U.S. is global leader more than any other nation in the world, and the 525 rule works. We have 5% of the globe's population. We have 25% of the globe's prisoners. 1/4 of the globe's prisoners are here in this nation state. And then there's meaningful race, place, incarceration disparity at the national level. And I just want to give this is a figure that represents white men aged 18 and older, adult white men, about 1 in 106 are incarcerated nationally. Latino men, 18 or older, 1 in 36. Black men, 18 and older, 1 in 15. As a result, the rates of imprisonment are profoundly disparate. African Americans' rate is about 7 times higher nationally than that of whites. And Latino rate about 3 times higher. Point. There's critical variation by race and by ethnicity, and that race-ethnicity dynamic is informed by location. An illustration of the nature of this disparity locally. Let me get to the local. This is an image that represents the 10 most racially disparate drug offense to incarceration counties in the United States. The top 10. Please note that number 3, county number 3, is Dane County, Wisconsin, in which the ratio of relative drug arrests, the ratio of African Americans to whites who serve time is 97-1. 97-1. So race, place disparities are informed nationally, but when you come to the local, back to Dante's comment, back to Tip O'Neill, all politics are local. The local disparities are even far more severe. So closer to home, African American rate nationally 7 times higher, but considering the local, the disparities are magnified. We can talk further about the characteristics of this place that would lead to such severe disparities. And by the way, just as a quick related aside, because I think it always matters, I always think about the chattel state South, the meaning of the Southern legacy in the quote, slave states. Mississippi's rate of incarceration, racial disparity is about 4-1. So here in Dane County, for this particular race, place, drug offense dynamic, it's 97-1, even relative to Mississippi, which is, anyway. So what we've created through the prison industrial complex is mass incarceration. Here I want to lean on Michelle Alexander and her terrific book, The New Jim Crow, for a brief representation of the definition, moving from the local to a recognition of the systemic process, the process that we are all invested in. The question is, how directly? Mass incarceration refers not only to the criminal justice system, but also to the larger web of laws, rules, policies, and customs that control those labeled criminals, both in and out of prison. They are cast into, literally and figuratively, cast into a caste of permanent second-class citizenship. Once released, former felons enter a hidden underworld of legalized discrimination and permanent social exclusion. So that's mass incarceration. It's not just us being the global leader. It's not just relatively disparate rates. It's a recognition of what happens in terms of life chances, not just to those former felons, but their spouses, the individuals they're in relationships with, their children, their grandmothers. It's a system of consequential change. So there are tons of collateral consequences. This is a very short list. I can't get into the dynamics as time allows me, but the question of enfranchisement. 2 states have the wisdom to allow all citizens, whether they're locked up or otherwise, to vote, Maine and Vermont. 2 of the states permanently disenfranchise all felonious criminals, Kentucky and Virginia. Once you have a felonious conviction, you can never vote again. The other states, the other 46 states are somewhere in between those 2. But the point is, there's significant reduction. And just as a quick related aside, if the 2000 election, if a third of the individuals who had been disenfranchised in the state of Florida had been able to vote in the 2000 election, there would have never been George Bush 2. Just to illustrate the meaningful consequence of that disenfranchisement. It's not just a stat. It's a consequential process outcome. Reduced job access, reduced welfare benefits, reduced public housing, reduced ability to apply for a student loan. So it's really a return of the black codes, the codes that were enforced after Reconstruction fell based on Rutherford B. Hayes' compromise and the nature of the second-class citizenship. That's our current reality. The question is, how close are you to it? So so that's the problem. That's the challenge. Let me spend a bit of time celebrating the living in the solution. The living in the solution. And Reconstruction Incorporated is an organization that I'll talk a bit about. Reconstructing Rage is happening. Point. 96 to, I've heard statistics as low as 93.2, as high as 97.4. So about an overwhelming proportion of those who are locked up will come back. And point two, returning citizens are a vital asset. They are absolutely a vital resource in the process of transformation. And the means through which that vital resource can be nurtured and the assets be maximized is through the lens of community justice. Community justice is tightly linked with restorative justice. Restorative justice as the systemic criminal justice processes of the judicial procedure. Community justice, what we all affiliate with. Anytime we attend a symposium that is oriented towards a justice or critical dialogue, anytime we have a conversation with a friend about a video that caught us sideways, anytime we engage ourselves as critically self-aware people, we are nurturing and engaging in community justice. But community justice the central focus of it is community level outcomes, shifting the emphasis from individual incidents to systemic patterns, from individual consciousness to social mores, and from individual goods to our common good. Let us move toward formal dialogues of our common good. Had the blessing of being a part of Dr. Martinez's and Nebi's workshop, in which we were a circle, a sacred circle, and we were sharing about fellowship across lines of individual and group differences in the nurturing of the common good. We were engaging in community justice in the most intimate of settings. That was very powerful. And I just want to send a shout out. So community justice relative to reentry. So book. Reconstructing Rage is an exploration of the contribution of Reconstruction Incorporated, an organization founded by former felons. William Goldsby, my co-author and longtime friend, is a two-time violent felon, served his time in the late 60s and early 70s, and is just a fascinating person that the book explores pieces of. It's not a autobiography by any times, and he refused to have a biographical chapter in the book, which is his choice. So we went with the larger collective. But the point of the book is to nurture community justice by exploring how an organization founded by former felons, centered on the vision of former felons, to be in partnership with former felons, their family members, and interested others, to come together to further what an organization does and how it collaborates to overcome challenges of that new Jim Crow, of those collateral consequences. They are being navigated with success by bringing organizational assets together to nurture change at the individual, family, and community levels. It's happening with former felons doing for them. You know, that old song, Sisters Are Doing It For Themselves, right? And sisters are vital, and I'll get to that in a second. Sisters are vital to doing it for themselves. But former felons are doing it for themselves. Okay. So Reconstruction in Philadelphia, and we need to get through this to get to the dialogue. But it's founded on the Sacred Circle, which is a concept of balance, equity, and justice that's rooted both in the ancient African and First Nation cultural traditions. And a partnership between the Ma'at is the continental African phrase, and there are a variety of First Nation phrases related to it. But rooted in the Sacred Circle, the idea of common equity. Every meeting, every person's voice is valued. Whether we have, and I've been in a meeting, whether it's a 93-year-old or whether it's a 6-year-old. We go around the circle and everyone Everyone has a check-in. Everyone does an assessment at the very end. It's a fascinating, powerful process of valuing sacred voices across profoundly different experiences. Sorry. Prioritizing shared respect and reciprocity, and consensus building. Consensus is the means through which decisions are made within the organization. And then by doing so, I'm a real fan of the educator Paulo Freire, may he rest in peace, a Brazilian educator, an incredible thinker. And he talked about the practice of freedom, the means by which women and men aren't educated to be pawns in the system, but are educated to be critically aware agents of transformation. The way in which women and men come into an understanding of the ability to transform their world. The best of what we do as educators nurtures the practice of freedom, and Reconstruction is built upon that premise. Not in a college setting or some education, in the nature of former felons in fellowship with themselves, family members, and interested others. So, bit on Reconstruction, founded by William Goldsby, began in 1988. It was incorporated in 1991, Incorporated in 1991 for independent 501c3 status. What started out as a satellite program of the American Friends Service Committee. AFSC is a fascinating organization with a complicated history, but they've done some really powerful justice work, including being a critical foundation to nurture this. The structure of Reconstruction Incorporated is a family-centered organization that has a rich set of dialogues and resource sharing across generations and is consensus-driven. We enter into collaborations with complicated dialectic collaborations, like with the Department of Corrections, to allow for a partnership where we can go into prisons and have dialogue. And I need to be tight with time, but I just want to send a shout out. At one point, we go into one of the oldest prisons in this country, Graterford. It was one of the first prisons ever established in this country, outside of Philadelphia. Within it, the lifers, the folks who will never see the light of day, because in Pennsylvania, life means life. That means you draw your last breath and you exit in a pine box. And the lifers were critical decision makers in making choices about who among the returning former felons within the last 18 months of their sentence should be among the first cohort of Reconstruction, experiencing the Reconstruction in prison curriculum. So we got the warden, Donald Vaughn, may he rest in peace, and the director of corrections, George Tahalik, at the time. We got them to allow, by law, current prisoners can't make any decisions on other current prisoners. We got them to alter that law, sort of work around that law, and to allow for that form of decision-making, collaborative decision-making, to move forward. So, other partnerships. So, some of them curious ones, like with the Department of Corrections. They're allies in our midst, in curious places. Bread and Roses, another social justice organization, the Philadelphia DA's office. 3 critical programs that I don't have time to get into, but if you want more information, you can certainly get it. But I do want to celebrate the programs. AEA is Alumni Ex-Offenders Association, former felons doing for themselves within the program. FFL is Fight for Lifers, the Lifers Initiative led by lifers and their family members on the outside, to further rich dialogues across the wall of prison, literally and figuratively. And LEAD is the Youth Prevention Initiative. LEAD stands for Leadership, Education, Advocacy, and Development. And the goal is to bring together either the children of those AEA or FFL members or other youths who are already in the school to prison pipeline, or just neighborhood kids who want to come into fellowship and build a clubhouse. And at one point, the building of a clubhouse became a critical justice initiative in an urban Philadelphia neighborhood in North Philadelphia. So I won't get into these details. There's a within prison curriculum, an in transition curriculum, and an ongoing curriculum within the organization. Oops, sorry. Sorry. Sorry, I apologize for this techno stuff. So, within prison, an in-transition program, and an ongoing initiative through those 3 programs, living the solution. And I just want to give a shout out to the sisters, the women of the organization, across generations. Jamila Vaughn is an incredible, incredible woman. Anyway, just an incredible woman. Longtime Reconstruction member, and one of the chapters, chapter 4, focuses on the experiences of women in the organization of Reconstruction. And at one point she says, in women's focus group that we held, while engaging with others who have been involved with Reconstruction, I've developed a voice I never knew I had, and I took that voice and I extended it to my family, some of whom were incarcerated. I didn't know how to do that in the past. Once I became part of Reconstruction, it really shaped me and developed me into a stronger woman, definitely into an activist. And also, I'm not so quick to judge others. That's how Reconstruction has helped me. Jamila Vaughn, shout out, incredible. She works with the homeless, just an amazing woman. A longtime Reconstruction member. And just to illustrate the dynamic of how the lived experience of Reconstruction from a former felon perspective is lived, one shout out from a longtime member and one of the founders of AEA, Mr. Dion Morrison. It's truly amazing to me the selflessness of the participating individuals of Reconstruction. I haven't run across anything else like it, Townsend. The ability to pull together and assist in any way possible, to just give. If Reconstruction put in any time or effort with an individual, they only ask that that individual come back and do something likewise that was given to them for the next person coming through the doors. Reciprocity, the nature of sacred exchange, fundamental to the principles and values of Reconstruction. Living the solution. No, it doesn't transform all those collateral consequences all at once, but it creates a safe space and a voice and a means through which individuals can be politicized in productive and proactive ways across various diverse differences. So a possible future. Grassroots capacity building is a fundamental in the nurturing of community justice is vital. We're doing it here. And as we continue to move through our lives, we will continue to do so as well. There's within the organization, there's a structure and a curriculum that nurtures a consensus building process driven by returning citizens as primary assets. And the process is never linear because sometimes some folks go back to picking up the dope. Sometimes folks, their sobriety does not last. Sometimes they go back to going to do whatever. Sometimes it's a complicated process. Growth for none of us, is growth linear. The consequences that we bear for the non-linearity varies dramatically depending upon our position in the criminal justice, in the process of mass incarceration. But Reconstruction keeps its doors open. Regardless of you cannot be, no one is barred, or I don't even have the language, kept from participating in Reconstruction. Across the complicated process of growth, the doors are always open. So I hope we can continue the dialogue to further an exploration of living in the solution. One quick comment, those are simply the points that we began with. And I simply raise the question, what might a prisonless society look like? What might it look like? And what kind of institutional, individual, familial relationships would inform and it be expressed through it? If collaboration is everything, we're in the process of moving toward the realization of that ideal, or whatever our ideal might be. So, thanks for your time and attention.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in me, so I'm gonna keep it moving. I'm so deeply, soulfully grateful for all of your presence and all of your participation and all the ways that you have been present all day, all year with us, and present today and in these moments. I was sitting here thinking about the ways in which I have a very complicated relationship with the prison industrial complex because I was raised by a prison guard. my mother, single woman, took care of us, first generation college student, by guarding mostly black and brown bodies in a federal prison, right? And there was a career waiting for me if I ever wanted to go there, right? And a woman who was a survivor of physical and sexual violence, and for whom my first memories are of her being violated by a man, right? So I understood why seeing bad people locked up worked for her, right? As a survivor, right, of great deals of violence. And so I've been thinking a lot about what does that mean for me, right, in my own politics, right? And so when you say we're all in, I was like, oh, I don't really deal with that, but we're all in it, right? And you know, my very existence depended on the prison industrial complex. It fed me, literally. It gave my mother a career that she could retire from. And what does that mean for us, right? So that's a sort of my local level processing. So that's what I'd like to move us to in our conversations with Barbara and Pam and Mario, to think about what are the ways in which, how is this showing up? You are all folks who are dealing with these issues in different particular ways locally. How are these issues showing up for you? What is coming up for you as we sit here and think about that? What questions you might want to raise or information you might want to share with us as we are sort of here in this moment. So that's what I'd like to sort of open the floor for whoever might want to sort of start participating with that. Do I need to call on someone? I need to call on someone. Mario, why don't you share with us, since you spoke?
No, we already decided that Pam Oliver is going to set the stage. And the reason being is that in order to understand this very complex thing that we're going to have a discussion about, you've got to know the numbers. And when I first saw the numbers, I didn't know Pam, and I knew she had to be a black female. And when I met her and I go, oh my God, she has this. And so what we'd like for Pam to do is to really set the tone and the numbers of what you've talked about, and then we'll open the dialogue and the conversation around some of the issues that we are seeing.
So Dante, I saw you had my old PowerPoint up there.
Yeah, yes.
Well, let's see what we got. So actually, I have much better PowerPoints. If I'd known we were going to do a PowerPoint, I would have given you my new updated PowerPoint. But, and I don't want to go, I actually have some notes about other things.
Okay.
So how many of you have already seen the PowerPoint?
When it was rolling.
Or when it was rolling, or, I mean, I've done 100 of these lectures, so I feel like half of Madison has seen it. But yeah, so a lot of people have actually already seen these pictures because I've done it so often.
It's on the drive, I think.
Well, okay, I'll just talk you through it. So I got into this in 1999. I went off to a conference called Money, Education, and Prison. I did not put on the conference. I was sitting in the audience. A local mixed-race group of folks who'd gotten concerned about these issues put on the conference. And basically, they were concerned that it was a death spiral, that money was being, more and more money was going to prisons, less and less money going into education. Where was this all going to lead? I sat in that audience. I heard some really good talks. I heard some numbers that just seemed shocking to me. And so I wasn't sure they were right. I mean, there's a lot of urban myths. I mean, some of the stuff that people throw around in this issue is actually not true. So I started looking things up, but it turned out things were actually really bad. So I heard, it is actually true that 20% of all black men have been in prison. It is actually true that the Bureau of Justice Statistics estimates that the lifetime expectancy of a black man spending time in prison is about 1 in 3. It is true that at least at the early 2000s, 12% of the young black men were in prison. That stuff's true. So I started just trying to look up some numbers. What actually, so I guess I'll be autobiographical about this. I should tell you, I didn't prepare any remarks. I thought we were just going to have a panel discussion. So you may want to kick me if I've talked too long. I volunteer. I was looking for a way to get more involved in the community. I've periodically, most of my life, tried to be an activist of one sort or another. I kind of took some time off when my children were young, and then I was looking for a way to reactivate. So I was hanging around, actually around MUM, around Madison Urban Ministry, looking to see if there was a way to connect. When I learned about this issue, people were going to put on a series of community forums to have people discuss this issue. I volunteered to be on the planning committee, and then I've said, well, you know, as part of my role, I'm interested in the answers to some statistical questions. I have some skills, so I'm just going to go see what I can find out. And that's really how it started, is just using the skills that I had to try to contribute to an issue. And so one of the lessons I thought it would be worth drawing is that all of us have different skills and talents and different positions, and we bring different things to the table. And part of what we need to do is to look around and say, you know, each one of us, who am I, what can I contribute? So it turned out, you know, I turned out to be a white woman who talks about race and a person who crunches numbers and puts up, you know, graphs on PowerPoints, and that turns out to be what I contribute to the situation. So that's how it started. I started doing these numbers. They shocked me. I couldn't believe it when I saw these numbers. I was double checking. At the time I started, people weren't ranking states on the racial disparities in things. So I was just trying to compute these numbers, see what happened. Turns out Wisconsin is terrible. It's the last I know, it may have gone down a little bit. The last time I ran the numbers was, you know, mid-2000s. Wisconsin's racial disparity is actually 20 to 1. Black people in Wisconsin are 20 times more likely to be incarcerated than white people. Dane County is actually worse than Milwaukee. We do have very high racial disparities. As far as I can tell from the numbers, our drug disparities actually peaked in the 1990s and then have actually been coming down. They're still actually really extraordinarily high, but they've been coming down. So I've been running numbers, and then I got involved in boards and commissions and all sorts of other things. My contribution personally has been locally just analyzing data to try to see what the patterns are and what's happening. So that's one role. It turns out that where these disparities are coming from is actually lots of different points in the system. And when you drill down and you drill down, you find this place, you find that place. The drug war in the 1980s, late 1980s, early 1990s, huge factor. One thing that the general public doesn't know yet has appeared, criminologists now know this, the racial disparity that at the national level actually peaked in 1995. It's been coming down. I'm not saying it's all great. It's actually not all great. It's still really terrible, but it has actually been coming down. Another thing that a lot of people don't know that's part of the slideshow is, so we have a long-standing problem with racism in this country. You probably know that. No. Some of you know that, okay. But how the problem manifests itself keeps moving around. So there was a long-standing disparity in criminal justice, but it actually went up in the 1980s, right? It went up after the civil rights movement. Now, another thing is that you saw those international trends. One of the things that I've calculated is that the white non-Hispanic incarceration rate in the United States is actually extremely high. So the white non-Hispanic incarceration rate in the US is actually 4 times that of Europe. And it's actually higher than the incarceration rate, counting everybody, of every country in the world except Russia and a few islands that have a lot of tourism. So our white non-Hispanic incarceration rate is extremely high, and that's actually part of the picture. And the general rise in punitiveness actually happened after the 1970s. I actually think, even though white people are also being locked up a lot, I actually think that's tied to the reaction to the civil rights movement and the post-riot era and stuff. And I'm a political sociologist kind of by trade, and that's how I think about things. So that's one issue. Then there's a racial disparity on top of it. And so we do have astronomical black incarceration rates that are just, there's no comparison around the world. Many countries of the world, most countries of the world have some minority that country incarcerates at much higher rates than it incarcerates its majority population. And that pattern is really global, and our racial disparities are pretty much in line with the disparities in many countries. What makes us unusual is this really high baseline white incarceration rate with this racial disparity on top of it, so that we get just these punishing levels, these extraordinarily high levels of incarceration for black people. So that's a part of the picture. What else is going on? Well, I started studying incarceration. That's what I have numbers on. But the more I get into this issue, the more I learn, the more I read, I learn about all these other crazy things that are going on. So the probation parole system, the community supervision system is just insane. People are on supervision all the time. They get yanked off probations, or particularly post-prison supervisions, get sent back to prison. Much of the numbers of incarceration is actually the churning of sending people back to prison through community supervision. That's a huge element. And actually in Wisconsin, as the drug war well, the drug war is still high, it's a big deal, but probation and parole became an increasingly important part of the problem. You know, if you only focused on drug convictions, you're actually missing where a lot of the action is. I got to finish.
Well, I think that's a good place for us to ask Barbara and Mario.
Excellent.
To
So
chime
just
in
to
on
wrap
that.
up very quickly, it's a constantly moving target. You've got to keep paying attention to what's going on. Yes, thank you for cutting me off.
So it was important for me to have Pam to lay that framework and for me to be able to move into that discussion. I supervise the adult programs for men and women who are returning to the community following incarceration in our agency. And today I was in a prison. I left here at noon. I co-facilitate a cognitive class in one of the prisons, and there were 10 men, 1 white. It was a phenomenal class. Age range 22 to 46. Sentencing 17 months to 18.5 years. All of them will be released back to Dane County within the next 8 months. And at the end of our group, we do an exercise, and I always have a talking piece, and it's a smooth rock. And on the rock, it's written "believe." And at the end, we pass the rock from person to person, and they complete the sentence, "I believe." And it's amazing, when we did it the first time, they looked at me like, this woman has got to be crazy. But after the third time we did it, they were anxious. "Miss McKinney, where is the rock?" And each one of them held the rock, and they said, "I believe." And each time they would do that, the "I believe" statements became stronger for them. I look at this whole thing from a restorative justice lens. I have to. Because if I did not look at this whole mass incarceration from a restorative justice lens, I would not be looking at the heart of the person. I'll be looking at the crime. And when you look at the crime, and some says, "Oh, you soft on crime," that's not it. But what I want to do is I want to look at the person inside. And I've been able to do that because I have to be honest, when I first moved to Madison, I've been in Madison about 7 years, and I moved here from St. Louis, Missouri to be with my son, who I spent an incredible last year of his life. And even though he was a prominent news anchor, first black news anchor on NBC 15, he talked about driving while black. That was a reality for him. When I moved to Madison, I thought, in St. Louis, we thought prison reentry and working in prison ministry was baking cookies and care packages and sending them to prisons, and we patted ourselves on the back and thought we were doing a great job. And then I filled in for Everett Mitchell, who was on family leave for 1 month, and Mary Kay Baum says, Barbara, you know, would you come in and fill in for Everett for 30 days? I go, sure, I'm a smart person. What could that be about? She neglected to tell me that this is a reentry office and men and women who had been in prison would be coming into the office. She kind of neglected to tell me that. And I was sitting in the office one day, and this huge, very black, very big, with huge arms, a huge neck, came into the office dressed in greens. And he had to turn sideways in order to get into the office. And there was no one in the office but me. My stereotype immediately kicked in, even for a black female. And I was trying to figure out how in the world could I get out of the office past him. And he sat down in a chair blocking my exit, and tears began to run down his face. And he talked about how frightened he was. He had just been released with only the clothes on his back, knew no one in Madison, but he found his way to Madison Area Urban Ministry. We sat there for 2.5 hours. He talked, I listened. That was my introduction to what restorative justice was really all about. I connected with the YW and their restorative justice program, and we did circle work, and we were able to work with men and women around the elephant in the room called racism that people really didn't want to talk about, but they needed to talk about. And in safe settings, we were able to talk about that elephant in the room. And then I connected with Jerry Hancock, volunteered with the prison ministry. And we started going into the maximum prisons. And men, 25 men, who were in a maximum security prison, sat in a circle. We passed a talking piece around. Tears ran down their eyes, and they talked about their life experiences. In order to do this work, I have to come from a place of restorative justice. And that restorative justice gets in touch with the harm, through creation of the harm, and the healing of the harm. And in the work that I do with Madison Area Urban Ministry, and I normally shave my head, so you got a treat. I got a wig on today, so. But when I go inside the institutions, and hair is a black woman's pride, I just have to tell you that. But when the men look at me, an elderly person coming in, and I just had a birthday, and I'll tell you all, I'm 66 and I'm proud of it. Yeah. But first, when they see a woman who has shaved her head and can go inside a prison and talk to them in language that they could understand, they are amazed and we connect. So I tell you this because you look at a Barbara McKinney and, you know, she's got a wig on, she looked like she got it all together, but guess what? She did not have it all together all of her life. I was born in Mississippi. I saw the signs. I've been called black, well, no, that's later. I've been called negress, nigger, negro, African American, black, and now I've been called a woman of color. I've experienced all of those. I've got the scars to show it. They says I got the t-shirt, I've got the scars to show it. But all of that prepared me to do the work that we do around restorative justice. even today, when I was coming back from being out at the institution, I was thinking about the men and the hope that they had in their eyes. And I was so thinking about the men, and I was trying to get here, and I looked up, and I saw Rhonda Williams. Guess how I saw her? My car connected with her. And immediately I went into a prayer mode, because in that instant, if I had been driving faster, the end result would have been devastating. I looked at her, she looked at me, and immediately, I guess she saw that in my eye, and so we kind of embraced, and I had to sit there, and I said, I could have hit you, which I did. I kind of bumped her, and I did. Where is she? There she is, right there. I bumped her. And I share this story because in each of our lives, there is an intersecting point.
You stopped short.
Did I show?
Your car did not hit you.
Oh, Lord, thank you. I thought I did. But she was in we were so close. It was inches, right? The point that I'm making is that in each of our lives, there is an intersecting point that can change our lives. And in an instant, if we can alter that and do something different, we would. And if I had bumped her in an instant, I said, oh, I should have been focusing on what I was doing. If I had only did this, or if I had only done that. And so as I work with men and women who are incarcerated, I understand. Now, we will always have prison because there are some bad people that really do need to be locked away. But I'm not talking about those. What I'm saying is that in that intersection of men and women who made a choice, and if they could go back and change it, they probably would. And so when we're doing this work about restorative justice and working with men and women as they transition back into the community, the thing that leads me to do the stuff that we do at Madison Area Urban Ministry is restorative justice. Everything we do is wrapped in this restorative justice. Accountability, yes, absolutely. But there is so much collateral damage related to this whole thing about incarceration that it is amazing. I'm at a point that I have never been in my life. And that intersection for me was reading, Pam Oliver wrote an article, and it's called Why Social Movement Scholars Should Pay Attention to Mass Incarceration as a Form of Repression. I read that. And then I read this again. And I listened to Michelle Alexander. She was here last week, and she said, the colored-only signs are down. For me, that was very powerful because I knew and I saw and I lived the color-only sign era. And so where I am is someplace in between Pam Oliver and those numbers and the new Jim Crow and the reality of there has to be a social movement. And I love being in dialogues and conversations that look like this. Most of the places that I am at look like this, with mostly people not of color. But that's where the dialogue, that's where the conversation has to begin. And so my pushback today is someplace between the numbers that you'll hear and this reality here. And I invite you to that conversation.
Muy buena tarde. Mi nombre es Mario Garcia. Es un gusto estar aquí con ustedes hoy esta tarde. I'm not gonna Mucho susto. I'm not gonna say whatever I have to say in Spanish. It's a little trick I have. I do it when I'm nervous, and I do it just to make you a little bit nervous. But what goes also is just to give you a little taste of what a lot of families have to deal on a daily basis when they don't understand the language. And that's what I'm here for today, just to share some of my personal and work and professional experience as a brown person, Latino person from Guatemala, being here in the United States. And as a community, the Latino community, as we call ourselves, or the Hispanic community, as the government says we are, we have a deep connections to this continent. And I'm sure you know that the poem that goes around that we didn't cross the borders crossed us. So I say this because right now there are about 52 million of us here in the US. About 14 million people are here with no documents, and those are families that have what's called a mixed immigration status. Some of them have papers, some of them don't. Some kids were born in a different country, and some of them were born here in the United States. And why are we here? Like, why I decided to leave all my family behind, my culture, my language, and everything, just to come here to Wisconsin, lovely Wisconsin. And we decided to come here on our own. It's called forced migration. And that forced migration comes from economic hardship, civil wars, and natural disasters, and now what is going on with the war on drugs. And guess what? The U.S. has played a main role, or a big role, in all of those issues. So we are here in a lot of cases thanks to the U.S. And here in Wisconsin, we are an emerging community, especially here in Dane County. As a nation, we saw the last elections, the power that we have as Latino voters. Some of our friends like to say that we elected our current president. But one thing that I want to talk about my work here with youth is that for most of the Latino youth I know, and the ones who have been part of the programs, and I will tell you a little bit more about that, what they have to say about the experience is really sad. And I really want us to really remember that as we have this discussion here, they are sitting in prison, basically, that they are sitting behind those walls. So I think that it's painful to hear those numbers, but it's like more painful to know that the kids that should be doing kid stuff are sitting behind those walls right now. I think it's really painful for me. But the ones who come close with us during with the different programs we have done, one thing that they have to say about the school is that it's a hostile environment. They have teachers, there's the staff that really don't understand them and really don't understand their families, and worst of all, don't have much of respect and don't treat them like human beings. And I think that that's when kids become disconnected with the school. And then you have that thing that's called a zero tolerance policy that we know, like the war on drugs, has led to all of this disproportionate effect on youth of color. But also, zero tolerance, I say sometimes, is only for black and brown kids, because there is no zero tolerance for other kids, right? And one thing about Dane County is that some people like to brag about the sheriff that we have here, that he is good in many fronts, and he is good in a lot of cases, but he is really bad on immigration. As we speak, there are people who are waiting to be deported from our local jail here. And we know of young people who have been deported from that jail, people who go for very minor offenses being deported from that jail. A friend of mine told me, oh, too bad that he is so good in other issues, so saying that we still have to support him. And I was like, oh, what will you do if he was pro-life and wouldn't support any of the women's issue that a lot of people that supposedly he support. And she was shocked because, I mean, she wouldn't be saying all of that if he wasn't supportive of that. So that's something that we have to work on, and that's something that you all need to help us with that. I'm going to share a little bit about a specific program that we have. And before I do that, we work with a lot of youth who in high school right now who came here at a very young age. And they don't have a social security number. They don't have papers. They went through all the 0 to K schooling, but when they get to high school, they face a lot of barriers. And a lot of the great programs that we have, even at this great university, don't allow them to go and get ready for college. But we created a program at a community organization here that it's kind of like a diversion program with the municipal court. And what that program aims to do is to identify the kids who are on their way to prison and get them out of there. And the experience was that listening to them is that the road to prison is like kind of like a highway where you're just going too fast. You're trying to find the near exit, and you just can't go because if you're going too fast, you see all these cars driving by you, and you just can't get off. But we were able to identify some really good practices of that program, and I'm just going to share them with you. One of them is to have a holistic approach, meaning that you work with the youth, but you also work with the family, and you involve the community in that. And for us, we have something that is called La Cultura Cura, Culture Heals, and we need to go back to our own cultural roots in order to heal ourselves, be strong human beings, and be able to be and thrive in this society. Another good practice is it needs to be community-based. It needs to be in the neighborhood where the kids live. It needs to be accessible. It needs to be a friendly place. Also, the staff needs to look like the kids. And I really don't care if you spent 6 months in Cuernavaca or in Guatemala and you think you're fluent and you think that you speak the language. The truth is that you don't, and you really can't really fulfill that role to really supporting these kids. And I say this with love for the people who really want to be in solidarity and support the work of community organizations, but also support the work of families who are in these situations. Restorative justice, I think that's big. I didn't know the phrase restorative justice until I came here to this country. I realized that I've been involved in that practice for a really long time without really having a specific name. The curriculum of the program really needs to reflect the lives of the youth, and it has to be a dialogue. It always needs to be changing depending on the youth you are serving. And most important, it has to be a collaboration with the main stakeholders, the stakeholders that sometimes we don't like to, or it's hard to have a conversation or sit down with. We had a really great collaboration with the police department, with the judge, with some mental institutions, with other agencies that really need to be on the table in order to save those youth. I think that there is work for all of us. My work, it's a lot of times like there are a lot of white people who come and say, I want to help, I want to volunteer, and there is a role for all of us. I think when it comes to youth, we need to map. We need to map and know where the decisions about our youth are being made. We need to know where the resources are going. And we need a lot of us sitting down at those tables and really being our ears and our eyes and our voice on those tables. But if you're going to do that, you need to be connected with the work. You need to be listening, especially to the youth and to the parents. If you get to those tables, if you don't listen from the youth and the parents, You're doing the work on your own, and that's not what we want. That's what that's what I basically want to share.
So, in my understanding of my own cultural realities, we're going to be really organic in this sort of closing moment, and collapse I want us to continue to have these conversations as a community about this impact, but I also want to acknowledge the time restraints that we're in. And so we're going to merge the closing reception with our continuous conversation and give you opportunities to participate in the reception foods and continue to have conversations about where we are around these issues of incarceration within our particular communities, for those of us here in Dane County or in other spaces, how we can do that. I believe that our guests are more than open to share and communicate with you about the other work that they're doing and share their insights and information as well. I want to thank you from the very bottom of my heart, my staff, to the staff of the Pyle Center and the Lowell Center and UW Extension. Thank you so much for all of your amazing, amazing work and your help. I learned at a very early age that you are always nice to and you honor the people who work behind the scenes to help things go very well. Many of us come from those people who have done that, and so I've learned to honor that and to acknowledge that contribution wherever I go. And I want to thank you all for your help and for helping this day go so well. I want to thank you all for showing up and being your wonderful, beautiful selves in all the ways that you have. So I'm going to release you now to recess and to have conversation. And in about 10 minutes, I'm going to announce our theme for 2014. So don't leave before I announce the theme. But I want you to refresh yourselves. You know, you might need some beverage and some different things. And then let's gather at the tables and continue our conversations. Is that okay? Yeah. All right.